Chapter 4 of The Last Plainsman by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti. The Last Plainsman by Zane Grey. Chapter 4. The Trail.
"Frank, what'll we do about horses?" asked Jones.
"Jim'll want to bay, and of course you'll want to ride Spot. The rest of our nags will only do to pack the outfit." "I've been thinking," replied the foreman. "You sure will need good mounts. Now it happens that a friend of mine is just at this time at House Rock Valley, an outlying post of one of the big Utah ranches. He is getting in the horses off the range, and he has some cracking good ones. Let's ooze over there. It's only 30 miles, and get some horses from him." We were all eager to act upon Frank's suggestion, so plans were made for the three of us to ride over and select our mounts. Frank and Jim would follow with the pack train, and if all went well, on the following evening we would camp under the shadow of Buckskin. Early next morning we were on our way. I tried to find a soft place on old Baldy, one of Frank's pack horses. He was a horse that would not have raised up at the trumpet of doom. Nothing under the sun, Frank said, bothered old Baldy but the operation of shoeing. We made the distance to the outpost by noon, and found Frank's friend a genial and obliging cowboy, who said we could have all the horses we wanted. While Jones and Wallace strutted around the big corral, which was full of vicious, dusty, shaggy horses and mustangs, I sat high on the fence. I heard them talking about points and girth and stride, and a lot of terms that I could not understand. Wallace selected a heavy sorrel, and Jones a big bay, very like Jim's. I had observed, way over in the corner of a corral, a bunch of cayuses, and among them a clean-limbed black horse. Edging round on the fence, I got a closer view, and then cried out that I had found my horse. I jumped down and caught him, much to my surprise, for the other horses were wild and had kicked viciously. The black was beautifully built, wide-chested and powerful, but not heavy. His coat glistened like sheeny black satin, and he had a white face and white feet and a long mane. "I don't know about giving you Satan. That's his name," said the cowboy. "The foreman rides him often. He's the fastest, the best climber, and the best dispositioned horse on the range. But I guess I can let you have him," he continued when he saw my disappointed face. "By George!" exclaimed Jones. "You've got it on us this time." "Would you like to trade?" asked Wallace, as his sorrel tried to bite him. "That black looks sort of fierce." I led my prize out of the corral, up to the little cabin near by, where I tied him, and proceeded to get acquainted after a fashion of my own. Though not versed in horse lore, I knew that half the battle was to win his confidence. I smoothed his silky coat and patted him, and then surreptitiously slipped a lump of sugar from my pocket. This sugar, which I had purloined in Flagstaff and carried all the way across the desert, was somewhat disreputably soiled, and Satan sniffed at it disdainfully. Evidently he had never smelled or tasted sugar. I pressed it into his mouth. He munched it, and then looked me over with some interest. I handed him another lump. He took it and rubbed his nose against me. Satan was mine. Frank and Jim came along early in the afternoon. What with packing, changing saddles, and shoeing the horses, we were all busy. Old Baldy would not be shod, so we let him off till a more opportune time. By 4 o'clock we were riding toward the slopes of Buckskin, now only a few miles away, standing up higher and darker. "What's that for?" inquired Wallace, pointing to a long, rusty, wire-wrapped, double-barreled blunderbuss of a shotgun stuck in the holster of Jones's saddle. The colonel, who had been having a fine time with the impatient and curious hounds, did not vouchsafe any information on that score. But very shortly we were destined to learn the use of this incongruous firearm. I was riding in advance of Wallace and a little behind Jones. The dogs, excepting Jude, who had been kicked and lamed, were ranging along before their master. Suddenly, right before me, I saw an immense jackrabbit, and just then Mose and Don caught sight of it. In fact, Mose bumped his blunt nose into the rabbit. When it leaped into scared action, Mose yelped, and Don followed suit. Then they were after it in wild, clamorous pursuit. Jones let out the stentorian blast, now becoming familiar, and spurred after them. He reached over, pulled the shotgun out of the holster, and fired both barrels at the jumping dogs. I expressed my amazement in strong language, and Wallace whistled. Don came sneaking back with his tail between his legs, and Mose, who had cowered as if stung, circled around ahead of us. Jones finally succeeded in getting him back.
"Come in, you measly rabbit dogs. What do you mean chasing off that way? We're after lions. Lions, understand?"
Don looked thoroughly convinced of his error, but Mose, being more thick-headed, appeared mystified rather than hurt or frightened. "Size shot do you use?" I asked.
"Number 10. They don't hurt much at 75 yards," replied our leader. "I use them as sort of a long arm. You see, the dogs must be made to know what we're after. Ordinary means would never do in a case like this. My idea is to break them off coyotes, wolves, and deer, and when we cross a lion trail, we'll let them go. I'll teach them sooner than you'd think. Only we must get where we can see what they're trailing. Then I can tell whether to call them back or not."
The sun was gilding the rim of the desert ramparts when we began the ascent of the foothills of Buckskin. A steep trail wound zigzag up the mountain. We led our horses, as it was a long, hard climb. From time to time I stopped to catch my breath. I gazed away across the growing void to the gorgeous pink cliffs far above and beyond the red wall which had seemed so high, and then out toward the desert. The irregular, ragged crack in the plain, apparently only a thread of broken ground, was the Grand Canyon. How unutterably remote, wild, grand was that world of red and brown, of purple pall, of vague outline. 2,000 feet, probably, we mounted to what Frank called Little Buckskin. In the west a copper glow, ridged with lead-colored clouds, marked where the sun had set. The air was very thin and icy cold. At the first clump of pinyon pines we made dry camp. When I sat down it was as if I had been anchored. Frank solicitously remarked that I looked sort of beat. Jim built a roaring fire and began getting supper. A snow squall came on the rushing wind. The air grew colder, and though I hugged the fire, I could not get warm. When I had satisfied my hunger, I rolled out my sleeping bag and crept into it. I stretched my aching limbs and did not move again. Once I awoke drowsily, feeling the warmth of the fire, and I heard Frank say, "He's asleep, dead to the world." "He's all in," said Jones. "Riding what did it. You know how a horse tears a man to pieces." "Will it be able to stand it?" asked Frank, with as much solicitude as if he were my brother. "When you get out after anything, well, you're hell. And think of country we're going into. I know you've never seen the breaks of this Siwash, but I have, and it's the worst and roughest country I ever saw. Breaks after breaks like the ridges on a washboard, headin' on the south slope of Buckskin and runnin' down side by side, miles and miles, deeper and deeper, till they run into that awful hole. It will be a killin' trip on men, horses, and dogs. Now, Mr. Wallace, he's been campin' and roughin' with the Navajos for months. He's in some kind of shape, but Frank concluded his remark with a doubtful pause.
"I'm some worried, too," replied Jones. "But he would come. He stood the desert well enough. Even the Mormons said that."
In the ensuing silence the fire sputtered, the glare fitfully merged into dark shadows under the weird pinyons, and the wind moaned through the short branches. "Well," drawled a slow, soft voice, "shore I reckon you're hollerin' too soon. Frank's measly trick puttin' him on Spot showed me. He rode out on Spot, and he rode in on Spot. Sure he'll stay." It was not all the warmth of the blankets that glowed over me then. The voices died away dreamily, and my eyelids dropped sleepily tight. Late in the night I sat up suddenly, roused by some unusual disturbance. The fire was dead. The wind swept with a rush through the pinyons. From the black darkness came the staccato chorus of coyotes. Don barked his displeasure, Sounder made the welkin ring, and old Mose growled low and deep, grumbling like muttered thunder. Then all was quiet, and I slept. Dawn, rosy red, confronted me when I opened my eyes. Breakfast was ready. Frank was packing old Baldy. Jones talked to his horse as he saddled him. Wallace came stooping, his giant figure under the pinyons. The dogs, eager and soft-eyed, sat around Jim and begged. The sun peeped over the pink cliffs. The desert still lay asleep, tranced in a purple and golden-streaked mist. "Come, come," said Jones in his big voice. "We're slow. Here's the sun." "Easy, easy," replied Frank. "We've got all the time there is." When Frank threw the saddle over Satan, I interrupted him and said I would care for my horse henceforward. Soon we were under way, the horses fresh, the dogs scenting the keen, cold air. The trail rolled over the ridges of pinyon and scrubby pine. Occasionally we could see the black, ragged crest of Buckskin above us. From one of these ridges I took my last long look back at the desert, and engraved on my mind a picture of the red wall and the many-hued ocean of sand. The trail, narrow and indistinct, mounted the last slow-rising slope. The pinyons failed, and the scrubby pines became abundant. At length we reached the top and entered the great arched aisles of Buckskin forest. The ground was flat as a table. Magnificent pine trees, with branches high and spreading, gave the eye glad welcome. Some of these monarchs were 8 feet thick at the base and 200 feet high. Here and there one lay gaunt and prostrate, a victim of the wind. The smell of pitch pine was sweetly overpowering. When I went through here 2 weeks ago, the snow was a foot deep and a bog in places, said Frank. The sun has been oozing around here some. I'm afraid Jones won't find any snow on this end of Buckskin. 30 miles of winding trail, brown and springy from its thick mat of pine needles, shaded always by the massive, seamy-barked trees, took us over the extremity of Buckskin. Then we faced down into the head of a ravine that ever grew deeper, stonier and rougher. I shifted from side to side, from leg to leg, in my saddle, dismounted and hobbled before Satan, mounted again, and rode on. Jones called the dogs and complained to them of the lack of snow. Wallace sat his horse comfortably, taking long pulls at his pipe and long gazes at the shaggy sides of the ravine. Frank, energetic and tireless, kept the pack horses in the trail. Jim jogged on silently, and so we rode down to Oakspring. The spring was pleasantly situated in a grove of oaks and pinyons under the shadow of 3 cliffs. 3 ravines opened here into an oval valley. A rude cabin of rough-hewn logs stood near the spring. Get down," sang out Frank. "We'll hang up here. Beyond Oak is no man's land. We take our chances on water after we leave here." When we had unsaddled, unpacked, and got a fire roaring on the wide stone hearth of the cabin, it was once again night. "Boys," said Jones after supper, "we're now on the edge of the lion country. Frank saw a lion sign in here only 2 weeks ago, and though the snow is gone, we stand a show of finding tracks in the sand and dust. Tomorrow morning, before the sun gets a chance at the bottom of these ravines, we'll be up and doing. We'll each take a dog and search in different directions. Keep the dog in leash, and when he opens up, examine the ground carefully for tracks. If a dog opens on any track that you are sure isn't a lion's, punish him. And when a lion track is found, hold the dog in, wait, and signal. We'll use a signal I have tried and found far-reaching and easy to yell. Wahoo! That's it. Once yelled, it means come. Twice means come quickly. 3 times means come danger." In one corner of the cabin was a platform of poles covered with straw. I threw the sleeping bag on this and was soon stretched out. Misgivings as to my strength worried me before I closed my eyes. Once on my back, I felt I could not rise. My chest was sore, my cough deep and rasping. It seemed I had scarcely closed my eyes when Jones' impatient voice recalled me from sweet oblivion. Frank, it's daylight. Jim, boys," he called. I tumbled out in a gray, wan twilight. It was cold enough to make the fire acceptable, but nothing like the morning before on Buckskin. "Come to the festal board," drawled Jim, almost before I had my boots laced." "Jones," said Frank, "Jim and I'll ooze around here to day. There's lots to do, and we want to have things hitched right before we strike for the Siwash. We've got to shoe old Baldy, and if we can't get him locoed, it'll take all of us to do it." The light was still gray when Jones led off with Don, Wallace with Sounder, and I with Mose. Jones directed us to separate, follow the dry stream beds in the ravines, and remember his instructions given the night before. The ravine to the right, which I entered, was choked with huge stones fallen from the cliff above, and pinyons growing thick, and I wondered apprehensively how a man could evade a wild animal in such a place, much less chase it. Old Mose pulled on his chain and sniffed at coyote and deer tracks, and every time he evinced such interest in such, I cut him with a switch, which, to tell the truth, he did not notice. I thought I heard a shout, and, holding Mose tight, waited and listened. "Wahoo! Wahoo!" floated on the air, rather deadened, as if it had come from round the triangular cliff that faced into the valley. Urging and dragging Mose, I ran down the ravine as fast as I could, and soon encountered Wallace coming from the middle ravine. "Jones," he said excitedly, "this way. There's the signal again." We dashed in haste for the mouth of the third ravine, and came suddenly upon Jones, kneeling under a pinyon tree. "Boys, look!" he exclaimed as he pointed to the ground. There, clearly defined in the dust, was a cat track as big as my spread hand, and the mere sight of it sent a chill up my spine. "There's a lion track for you, made by a female, 2-year-old, but can't say if she passed here last night. Don won't take the trail. Try Mose." I led Mose to the big round imprint, and put his nose down into it. The old hound sniffed and sniffed, then lost interest. "Cold," ejaculated Jones. "No go. Try Sounder. Come on, boy. You've got a nose for it." He urged the reluctant hound forward. Sounder needed not to be shown the trail. He stuck his nose in it, and stood very quiet for a long moment. Then he quivered slightly, raised his nose, and sought the next track. Step by step he went slowly, doubtfully. All at once his tail wagged stiffly. "Look at that!" cried Jones in delight. "He's caught a scent when the others couldn't. Hey, Mose, get back. Keep Mose and Don back. Give him room." Slowly Sounder paced up the ravine as carefully as if he were traveling on thin ice. He passed the dusty open trail to a scaly ground with little bits of grass, and he kept on. We were electrified to hear him give vent to a deep bugle blast note of eagerness. "By George, he's got it, boys!" exclaimed Jones, as he lifted the stubborn, struggling hound off the trail. "I know that bay. It means a lion passed here this morning, and we'll get him up as sure as you're alive. Come, Sounder. Now for the horses." As we ran pell-mell into the little glade, where Jim sat mending some saddle trapping, Frank strode up the trail with the horses. "Well, I heard Sounder," he said with his genial smile. "Something's coming off, eh?" "You'll have to ooze round some to keep up with that hound." I saddled Satan with fingers that trembled in excitement, and pushed my little Remington automatic into the rifle holster. "Boys, listen," said our leader. "We're off now in the beginning of a hunt new to you. Remember, no shooting, no bloodletting, except in self-defense. Keep as close to me as you can, listen for the dogs, and when you fall behind or separate, yell out the signal cry. Don't forget this. We're bound to lose each other. Look out for the spikes and branches on the trees. If the dogs split, whoever follows the one the trees they lie on must wait there till the rest come up. Off now. Come, Sounder, Mose, you rascal, hiya, come, Don, come, puppy, and take your medicine." Except Mose, the hounds were all trembling and running eagerly to and fro. When Sounder was loosed, he led them in a bee-line to the trail, with us cantering after. Sounder worked exactly as before, only he followed the line of tracks a little further up the ravine before he bayed. He kept going faster and faster, occasionally letting out one deep, short yelp. The other hounds did not give tongue, but eager, excited, baffled, kept at his heels. The ravine was long, and the wash at the bottom, up which the lion had proceeded, turned and twisted round boulders large as houses, and led through dense growths of some short, rough shrub. Now and then the lion tracks showed plainly in the sand. For 5 miles or more, Sounder led us up the ravine, which began to contract and grow steep. The dry stream bed got to be full of thickets of poplar, tall, straight branchless saplings about the size of a man's arm, and growing so close we had to press them aside to let our horses through. Presently Sounder slowed up and appeared at fault. We found him puzzling over an open grassy patch, and after nosing it for a little while, he began skirting the edge. "Cute dog," declared Jones. "That Sounder will make a lion chaser. Our game has gone up here somewhere." Sure enough, Sounder directly gave tongue from the side of the ravine. It was climb for us now. Broken shale, rocks of all dimensions, pinyons down and pinyons up, made ascending no easy problem. We had to dismount and lead our horses. Thus losing ground, Jones forged ahead and reached the top of the ravine first. When Wallace and I got up, breathing heavily, Jones and the hounds were out of sight, but Sounder kept voicing his clear call, giving us our direction. Off we flew, over ground that was still rough, but enjoyable going compared to the ravine slopes. The ridge was sparsely covered with cedar and pinyon, through which, far ahead, we pretty soon spied Jones. Wallace signaled, and our leader answered twice. We caught up with him on the brink of another ravine, deeper and craggier than the first, full of dead, gnarled pinyon and splintered rocks. "This gulch is the largest of the 3 that head in at Oakspring," said Jones. "Boys, don't forget your direction. Always keep a feeling where camp is. Always sense it every time you turn. The dogs have gone down. That lion is in here somewhere. Maybe he lives down in the high cliffs near the spring and came up here last night for a kill. He's buried somewhere. Lions never travel far. Hark! Hark! There's Sounder and the rest of them. They've got the scent. They've all got it. Down, boys, down and ride." With that he crashed into the cedar with a way that showed me how impervious he was to slashing branches sharp as thorns in steep descent and peril. Wallace's big sorrel plunged after him, and the rolling stones cracked. Suffering as I was by this time, with cramp in my legs and torturing pain, I had to choose between holding my horse in or falling off. So I chose the former, and accordingly got behind. Dead cedar and pinyon trees lay everywhere, with their contorted limbs reaching out like the arms of the devilfish. Stones blocked every opening, making the bottom of the ravine. After what seemed an interminable time, I found the tracks of Jones and Wallace. A long wahoo drew me on. Then the mellow bay of a hound floated up the ravine. Satan made up time in the sandy stream bed, but kept me busy dodging overhanging branches. I became aware, after a succession of efforts to keep from being strung on pinyons, that the sand before me was clean and trackless. Hauling Satan up sharply, I waited irresolutely and listened. Then from high up on the ravine side wafted down a medley of yelps and barks. Wahoo! Wahoo! Ringing down the slope, pealed against the cliff behind me, and sent the wild echoes flying. Satan, of his own accord, headed up the incline. Surprised at this, I gave him free rein. How he did climb! Not long did it take me to discover that he picked out easier going than I had. Once I saw Jones crossing a ledge far above me, and I yelled our signal cry. The answer returned clear and sharp. Then its echo crackled under the hollow cliff, and crossing and recrossing the ravine, it died at last, far away, like the muffled peal of a bell-buoy. Again I heard the blended yelping of the hounds, and closer at hand I saw a long, low cliff above, and decided that the hounds were running at the base of it. Another chorus of yelps, quicker, wilder than the others, drew a yell from me. Instinctively I knew the dogs had jumped game of some kind. Satan knew it as well as I, for he quickened his pace and sent the stones clattering behind him. I gained the base of the yellow cliff, but found no tracks in the dust of ages that had crumbled in its shadow, nor did I hear the dogs. Considering how close they had seemed, this was strange. I halted and listened. Silence reigned supreme. The ragged cracks in the cliff walls could have harbored many a watching lion, and I cast an apprehensive glance into their dark confines. Then I turned my horse to get around the cliff and over the ridge. When I again stopped, all I could hear was the thumping of my heart and the laboring panting of Satan. I came to a break in the cliff, a steep place of weathered rock, and I put Satan to it. He went up with a will. From the narrow saddle of the ridge crest, I tried to take my bearings. Below me slanted the green of pinyon,
with bleached treetops standing like spears and uprising yellow stones. Fancying I heard a gunshot, I leaned a straining ear against the soft breeze. The proof came presently in the unmistakable report of Jones's blunderbuss. It was repeated almost instantly, giving reality to the direction, which was down the slope of what I concluded must be the third ravine. Wondering what was the meaning of the shots, and chagrined because I was out of the race, but calmer in mind, I let Satan stand. Hardly a moment elapsed before a sharp bark tingled in my ears. It belonged to old Mose. Soon I distinguished a rattling of stones and the sharp metallic clicks of hoofs striking rocks. Then into a space below me loped a beautiful deer, so large that at first I took it for an elk. Another sharp bark, nearer this time, told the tale of Mose's dereliction. In a few moments he came in sight, running with his tongue out and his head held high. "Hi-ya, you old gladiator! Hi-ya, hi-ya!" I yelled and yelled again. Mose passed over the saddle on the trail of the deer, and his short bark floated back to remind me how far he was from a lion dog. Then I divined the meaning of the shotgun reports. The hounds had crossed a fresher trail than that of the lion, and our leader had discovered it. Despite a keen appreciation of Jones's task, I gave way to amusement, and repeated Wallace's paradoxical formula: pet the lions and shoot the hounds. So I headed down the ravine, looking for a blunt, bold crag, which I had descried from camp. I found it before long, and, profiting by past failures to judge of distance, gave my first impression a great stretch, and then decided that I was more than 2 miles from Oak. Long after 2 miles had been covered, and I had begun to associate Jim's biscuits with a certain soft seat near a ruddy fire, I was apparently still the same distance from my landmark crag. Suddenly a slight noise brought me to a halt. I listened intently. Only an indistinct rattling of small rocks disturbed the impressive stillness. It might have been the weathering that goes on constantly, and it might have been an animal. I inclined to the former idea till I saw Satan's ears go up. Jones had told me to watch the ears of my horse, and short as had been my acquaintance with Satan, I had learned that he always discovered things more quickly than I, so I waited patiently. From time to time a rattling roll of pebbles, almost musical, caught my ears. It came from the base of the wall of yellow cliff, and barred the summit of all those ridges. Satan threw up his head and nosed the breeze. The delicate, almost stealthy sounds, the action of my horse, the waiting, drove my heart to extra work. The breeze quickened and fanned my cheek, and borne upon it came the faint and far-away bay of a hound. It came again and again, each time nearer. Then on a stronger puff of wind rang the clear, deep, mellow call that had given Sounder his beautiful name. Never, it seemed, had I heard music so blood-stirring. Sounder was on the trail of something, and he had it headed my way. Satan heard and shot up his long ears and tried to go ahead, but I restrained and soothed him into quiet. Long moments I sat there with the poignant consciousness of the wildness of the scene, of the significant rattling of the stones, and of the bell-tongued hound baying incessantly, sending warm joy through my veins. The absorption in sensations now, yielding only to the hunting instinct when Satan snorted and quivered. Again the deep-tongued bay rang into the silence with the stirring thrill of life, and a sharp rattling of stones just above brought another snort from Satan. Across an open space in the pinyons a gray form flashed. I leapt off Satan and knelt to get a better view under the trees. I soon made out another deer passing along the base of the cliff. Nodding again, I rode up to the cliff to wait for Sounder. A long time I had to wait for the hound. It proved that the atmosphere was as deceiving in regard to sound as to sight. Finally Sounder came running along the wall. I got off to intercept him. The crazy fellow! He had never responded to my overtures of friendship, uttered short, sharp yelps of delight, and actually leapt into my arms. But I could not hold him. He darted upon the trail again and paid no heed to my angry shouts. With resolve to overhaul him, I jumped on Satan and whirled after the hound. The black stretched out with such a stride that I was at pains to keep my seat. I dodged the jutting rocks and projecting snags, felt stinging branches in my face and the rush of sweet, dry wind. Under the crumbling walls, over slopes of weathered stone and droppings of shelving rock,
round protruding noses of cliff. Over and under pinyons Satan thundered. He came out on top of the ridge at the narrow back I called a saddle. Here I caught a glimpse of Sounder far below, going down into the ravine from which I had ascended some time before. I called to him, but I might as well call to the wind. Weary to the point of exhaustion, I once more turned Satan toward camp. I lay forward on his neck and let him have his will. Far down the ravine I awoke to strange sound, and soon recognized the cracking of iron-shod hoofs against stone, then voices. Turning an abrupt bend in the sandy wash, I ran into Jones and Wallace. "Fall in. Line up in the sad procession," said Jones. "Tige and the pup are faithful. The rest of the dogs are somewhere between the Grand Canyon and the Utah desert." I related my adventures and tried to spare Mose and Sounder as much as conscience would permit. "Hard luck," commented Jones. "Just as the hounds jumped the Cougar. Oh, they bounced him out of the rocks all right. Don't you remember just under the cliff wall where you and Wallace came up to me? Well, just as they jumped him, they ran right into fresh deer tracks. I saw one of the deer. Now that's too much for any hounds except those trained for lions. Shot at Mose twice, but couldn't turn him. He has to be hurt. They've all got to be hurt to make them understand." Wallace told of a wild ride somewhere in Jones's wake, and of sundry knocks and bruises he had sustained, of pieces of corduroy he had left decorating the cedars, and of a most humiliating event where a gaunt and bare-pinioned snag had penetrated under his belt and lifted him, mad and kicking, off his horse. "These western nags will hang you on a limb every chance they get," declared Jones, "and don't you overlook that. Well, there's the cabin. We'd better stay here for a few days or a week and break in the dogs and horses, for this day's work was apple pie to what we'll get in the Siwash." I groaned inwardly and was remorselessly glad to see Wallace fall off his horse and walk on one leg to the cabin. When I got my saddle off Satan, had given him a drink and hobbled him, I crept into the cabin and dropped like a log. I felt as if every bone in my body was broken and my flesh was raw. I got gleeful gratification from Wallace's complaints and Jones' remark that he had a stitch in his back. So ended the first chase after cougars. End of chapter 4. The Last Plainsman by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti. The Last of the Plainsmen by Zane Grey. Chapter 5. Oakspring. Mose and Don and Sounder straggled into camp next morning, hungry, footsore, and scared. And as they limped in, Jones met them with characteristic speech. "Well, you decided to come in when you got hungry and tired. Never thought of how you fooled me, did you? Now the first thing you get is a good licking." He tied them in a little log pen near the cabin and whipped them soundly. And the next few days, while Wallace and I rested, he took them out separately and deliberately ran them over coyote and deer trails. Sometimes we heard his stentorian yell as a forerunner to the blast from his old shotgun. Then again we heard the shots unheralded by the yell. Wallace and I waxed warm under the collar over this peculiar method of training dogs, and each of us made dire threats. But in justice to their implacable trainer, the dogs never appeared to be hurt. Never a spot of blood fleckered on their glossy coats, nor did they ever come home limping. Sounder grew wise, and Don gave up, but Mose appeared not to change. "All hands ready to rustle," sang out Frank one morning. "Old Baldy's got to be shod." This brought us all except Jones out of the cabin, to see the object of Frank's anxiety tied to a nearby oak. At first I failed to recognize old Baldy. Vanished was his slow, sleepy, apathetic manner that had characterized him. His ears lay back on his head, fire flashed from his eyes. When Frank threw down the kit bag, which emitted a metallic clanking, old Baldy sat back on his haunches, planted his 4 feet deep in the ground, and plainly as a horse could speak, said, "No." "Sometimes he's bad, and sometimes he's worse," growled Frank. "Shore he's plumb bad this morning," replied Jim. Frank got the three of us to hold Baldy's head and pull him up. Then he ventured to lift a hind foot over his knee. Old Baldy straightened out his leg and sent Frank sprawling into the dirt. Twice again Frank patiently tried to hold a hind leg, with the same result, and then he lifted a forefoot. Baldy uttered a very intelligible snort, bit through Wallace's glove, yanked Jim off his feet, and scared me so that I let go of his forelock. Then he broke the rope which held him to the tree. There was a plunge, a scattering of men, though Jim still valiantly held on to Baldy's head, and a thrashing of scrub pinion, where Baldy reached out vigorously with his hind feet. But for Jim, he would have escaped. "What's all the row?" called Jones from the cabin. Then from the door, taking in the situation, he yelled, "Hold on, Jim. Pull down on the ornery old cayuse." He leaped into action with a lasso in each hand, one whirling around his head. The slender rope straightened with a whiz and whipped around Baldy's legs as he kicked viciously. Jones pulled it tight, then fastened it with nimble fingers to the tree. Let go, Jim," he yelled, whirling the other lasso. The rope flashed and fell over Baldy's head and tightened around his neck. Jones threw all the weight of his burly form on the lariat, and Baldy crashed to the ground, rolled, tussled, screamed, and then lay on his back, kicking the air with three free legs. "Hold this," ordered Jones, giving the tight rope to Frank, whereupon he grabbed my lasso from the saddle, roped Baldy's 2 forefeet, and pulled him down on his side. This lasso he fastened to a scrub cedar. "He's choking," said Frank. "Likely he is," replied Jones shortly. "It'll do him good." But with his big hands he drew the coil loose and slipped it down over Baldy's nose, where he tightened it again. "Now go ahead," he said, taking the rope from Frank. It had all been done in a twinkling. Baldy lay there groaning and helpless, and when Frank once again took hold of the wicked leg, he was almost passive. When the shoeing operation had been neatly and quickly attended to, and Baldy released from his uncomfortable position, he struggled to his feet with heavy breaths, shook himself, and looked at his master. "How'd you like being hog-tied?" queried his conqueror, rubbing Baldy's nose. "Now, after this, you'll have some manners." Old Baldy seemed to understand, for he looked sheepish, and lapsed once more into his listless, lazy unconcern. "Where's Jim's old cayuse, the pack horse?" asked our leader. "Lost. Couldn't find him this morning, and had a deuce of a time finding the rest of the bunch. Old Baldy was cute. He hid in a bunch of pinyons and stood quiet so his bell wouldn't ring. I had to trail him." "Do the horses stay far away when they are hobbled?" inquired Wallace. "If they keep jumping all night, they can cover some territory. We're now on the edge of the wild horse country, and our nags know this as well as we. They smell the mustangs and would break their necks to get away. Satan and the sorrel were 10 miles from camp when I found them this morning, and Jim's cayuse went farther, and we never will get him. He'll wear his hobbles out, then away with the wild horses. Once with them, he'll never be caught again." On the 6th day of our stay at Oak, we had visitors whom Frank introduced as the Stewart brothers and Lawson, wild horse wranglers. They were still, dark men, whose facial expressions seldom varied, tall and lithe and wiry as the mustangs they rode. The Stewarts were on their way back to Kanab, Utah, to arrange for the sale of a drove of horses they had captured and corralled in a narrow canyon back in the Siwash. Lawson said he was at our service and was promptly hired to look after our horses. "Any cougar signs back in the breaks?" asked Jones. "Well, there's a cougar on every deer trail," replied the elder Stewart, "and 2 for every pinto in the breaks. Old Tom himself downed 15 colts for us this spring." 15 colts? That's wholesale murder. Why don't you kill the butcherer?" "We've tried more'n once. It's a terrible busted up country, them breaks. No man knows it, and the cougars do. Old Tom ranges all the ridges and breaks, even up on the slopes of Buckskin. But he lives down there in them holes, and Lord knows no dog I ever seen could follow him. We tracked him in the snow and had dogs after him, but none could stay with him, except 2 as never come back. But we've nothing agin old Tom like Jeff Clark, a hoss rustler, who has a string of pintos corralled north of us. Clark swears he ain't raised a colt in 2 years. "We'll put that old cougar up a tree," exclaimed Jones. "If you kill him, we'll make you all a present of a Mustang, and Clark, he'll give you 2 each," replied Stewart. "We'd be getting rid of him cheap." "How many wild horses are on the mountain now?" "Hard to tell. 2,000 or 3,000, maybe. There's almost no catching 'em, and they're growing all the time. We ain't had no luck this spring.
Bunch in corral we got last year.
Seen anything of the White Mustang?" inquired Frank. "Ever get a rope near him?" "No, near we have for 6 years back. He can't be catched. We seen him and his band of blacks a few days ago, headin' for a water hole down where Nail Canyon runs into Kanab Canyon. He's so cunnin' he'll never water at any of our trap corrals, and we believe he can go without water for 2 weeks unless maybe he's at a secret hole we never trailed him to."
"Would we have any chance to see this White Mustang and his band?" questioned Jones.
"Same? Why, that'd be easy. Go down to Snake Gulch, camp at Singin' Cliffs, go over to Nail Canyon and wait. Then send some one slippin' down to the water hole at Kanab Canyon, and when the band comes to drink, which I reckon will be in a few days now, have them drive the Mustangs up. Only be sure to have them get ahead of the White Mustang, so he'll have only one way to come, for he sure is knowin'. He never makes a mistake. Maybe you'll get to see him come by like a white streak. Why, I've heerd that Mustang's hoofs ring like bells on the rocks a mile away. His hoofs are harder than any iron shoe as ever made. But even if you don't get to see him, Snake Gulch is worth seeing."
I learned later from Stewart that the White Mustang was a beautiful stallion of the wildest strain of Mustang blue blood. He had roamed the long reaches between the Grand Canyon and Buckskin toward its southern slope for years. He had been the most sought-for horse by all the wranglers, and had become so shy and experienced that nothing but a glimpse was ever obtained of him. A singular fact was, he never attached any of his own species to his band, unless they were coal black. He had been known to fight and kill other stallions, but he kept out of the well-wooded and watered country frequented by other bands, and ranged the breaks of the Siwash as far as he could range. The usual method, indeed the only successful way to capture wild horses, was to build corrals around the water holes. The wranglers lay out night after night watching. When the Mustangs came to drink, which was always after dark, the gates would be closed on them. But the trick had never been tried on the White Mustang, for the simple reason that he had never approached one of the traps.
"Boys," said Jones, "saying we need breaking in. We'll give the White Mustang a little run."
This was most pleasurable news, for the wild horses fascinated me. Besides, I saw from the expression on our leader's face that an uncapturable Mustang was an object of interest to him. Wallace and I had employed the last few warm sunny afternoons in riding up and down the valley below Oak, where there was a fine level stretch. Here I wore out my soreness of muscle and gradually overcame my awkwardness in the saddle. Frank's remedy of maple sugar and red pepper had rid me of my cold, and with the return of strength and the coming of confidence, full, joyous appreciation of wild environment and life made me unspeakably happy. And I noticed that my companions were in like condition of mind, though self-contained where I was exuberant. Wallace galloped to sorrel and watched the crags. Jones talked more kindly to the dogs. Jim baked biscuits indefatigably and smoked in contented silence. Frank said always, "We'll ooze along easy like, for we've all the time there is," which sentiment, whether from reiterated suggestion or increasing confidence in the practical cowboy, or charm of its free import, gradually won us all.
"Boys," said Jones as we sat around the campfire, "I see you're getting in shape. Well, I've worn off the wire edge myself, and I have the hounds coming fine. They mind me now, but they're mystified. For the life of them, they can't understand what I mean. I don't blame them. Wait till by good luck we get a cougar in a tree. When Sounder and Don see that, we've lion dogs, boys. We've lion dogs. But Mose is a stubborn brute. In all my years of animal experience, I've never discovered any other way to make animals obey than by instilling fear and respect into their hearts. I've been fond of buffalo, horses, and dogs, but sentiment never ruled me. When animals must obey, they must, that's all, and no mawkishness. But I never trusted a buffalo in my life. If I had, I wouldn't be here tonight. You all know how many keepers of tame wild animals get killed. I could tell you dozens of tragedies. And I've often thought, since I got back from New York, of that woman I saw with her troop of African lions. I'd dream about those lions and see them leaping over her head. What a grand sight that was! But the public is fooled. I read somewhere that she trained those lions by love. I don't believe it. I saw her use a whip and steel spear. Moreover, I saw many things that escaped most observers. How she entered the cage, how she maneuvered among them, how she kept a compelling gaze on them. It was an admirable, a great piece of work. Maybe she loves those huge yellow brutes, but her life was in danger every moment while she was in that cage, and she knew it. Some day one of her pets, likely the king of beasts she pets the most, will rise up and kill her. That is as certain as death. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of The Last Plainsman by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti. The Last Plainsman by Zane Grey. Chapter 6. The White Mustang. For 30 miles down Nail Canyon we marked in every dusty trail and sandy wash the small, oval, sharply defined tracks of the White Mustang and his band. The canyon had been well named. It was long, straight, and square-sided. Its bare walls glared steel gray in the sun, smooth, glistening surfaces that had been polished by wind and water. No weathered heaps of shale, no crumbled piles of stone obstructed its level floor. And softly toning its drab austerity, here grew the white sage waving in the breeze, the Indian paintbrush with vivid vermilion flower, and patches of fresh green grass. The White King, as we Arizona wild hoss wranglers call this mustang, is mighty particular about his feed, and he ranged along here last night, easy like browsing on the white sage," said Stewart, infected by our intense interest in the famous mustang, and ruffled slightly by Jones's manifest surprise and contempt that no one had captured him. Stewart had volunteered to guide us. "Never knowed him to run in this way for water. Fact is, never knowed Nail Canyon had a fork. It splits down here, but you'd think it was only a crack in the wall. And that cunnin' mustang, he's been foolin' us for years about this water hole." The fork of Nail Canyon, which Stewart had decided we were in, had been accidentally discovered by Frank, who, in search of our horses one morning, had crossed a ridge, to come suddenly upon the blind, box-like head of the canyon. Stewart knew the lay of the ridges and run of the canyons as well as any man could know a country where seemingly every rod was ridged and bisected, and he was of the opinion that we had stumbled upon one of the White Mustang's secret passages by which he had so often eluded his pursuers. Hard riding had been the order of the day, but still we covered 10 more miles by sundown. The canyon apparently closed in on us, so camp was made for the night. The horses were staked out and supper made ready while the shadows were dropping, and when darkness settled thick over us, we lay under our blankets. Morning disclosed the White Mustang's secret passage. It was a narrow cleft, splitting the canyon wall, rough, uneven, tortuous, and choked with fallen rocks. No more than a wonderful crack in the solid stone, opening into another canyon. Above us the sky seemed a winding, flowering stream of blue. The walls were so close in places that a horse with pack would have been blocked, and a rider had to pull his legs up over the saddle. On the far side the passage fell very suddenly for several hundred feet to the floor of the other canyon. No hunter could have seen it or suspected it from that side. "This is Grand Canyon country, and nobody knows what he's going to find," was Frank's comment. "Now we're in Nail Canyon proper," said Stewart, "and I know my bearin's. I can climb out a mile below and cut across Kanab Canyon and slip up into Nail Canyon again, ahead of the Mustangs, and drive 'em up. I can't miss 'em, for Kanab Canyon is impassable down a little ways. The Mustang'll have to run this way, so all you need to do is go below the break where I climb out and wait. You're sure going to get a look at the White Mustang. But wait. Don't expect him before noon, and after that, any time till he comes. Maybe it'll be a couple of days, so keep a good watch."
Then, taking our man Lawson with blankets and a knapsack of food, Stewart rode off down the canyon. We were early on the march. As we proceeded, the canyon lost its regularity and smoothness. It became crooked as a rail fence, narrower, higher, rugged, and broken. Pinnacled cliffs, cracked and leaning, menaced us from above. Mountains of ruined wall had tumbled into fragments. It seems that Jones, after much survey of different corners, angles, and points in the canyon floor, chose his position with much greater care than appeared necessary for the ultimate success of our venture, which was simply to see the white Mustang, and, if good fortune attended us, to snap some photographs of this wild king of horses. It flashed over me that, with his ruling passion strong within him, our leader was laying some kind of trap for the Mustang, was indeed bent on his capture. Wallace, Frank, and Jim were stationed at a point below the break where Stewart had evidently gone up and out. How a horse could have climbed that streaky wide slide was a mystery. Jones's instructions to the men were to wait until the Mustangs were close upon them, and then yell and shout and show themselves. He took me to a jutting corner of the cliff, which hid us from the others, and he exercised still more care in scrutinizing the lay of the ground. A wash from 10 to 15 feet wide, and as deep, ran through the canyon in a somewhat meandering course. At the corner which consumed so much of his attention, the dry ditch ran along the cliff wall about 50 feet out. Between it and the wall was good level ground. On the other side, huge rocks and shale made it hummocky, practically impassable for a horse. It was plain the Mustangs, on their way up, would choose the inside of the wash, and here in the middle of the passage, just around the jutting corner, Jones tied our horses to good strong bushes. His next act was significant. He threw out his lasso, and, dragging every crook out of it, carefully recoiled it, and hung it loose over the pommel of his saddle. "The white Mustang may be yours before dark," he said with a smile that came so seldom. "Now, I placed our horses there for 2 reasons. The Mustangs won't see them until they're right on them. Then you'll see a sight, and you'll have a chance for a great picture. They will halt, the stallion will prance, whistle, and snort for a fight, and then they'll see the saddles and be off. We'll hide across the wash down a little way, and at the right time we'll shout and yell to drive them up." By piling sagebrush around a stone, we made a hiding place. Jones was extremely cautious to arrange the bunches in natural positions. "A Rocky Mountain bighorn is the only 4-footed beast," he said, "that has a better eye than a wild horse. A cougar has an eye, too. He's used to lying high up on the cliffs and looking down for his quarry, so as to stalk it at night. But even a cougar has to take second to a Mustang when it comes to sight." The hours passed slowly. The sun baked us. The stones were too hot to touch. Flies buzzed behind our ears. Tarantulas peeped at us from holes. The afternoon slowly waned. At dark we returned to where we had left Wallace and the cowboys. Frank had solved the problem of water supply, for he had found a little spring trickling from a cliff, which, by a skillful management, produced enough drink for the horses. We had packed our water for camp use. "You take the first watch tonight," said Jones to me after supper. "The Mustangs might try to slip through our fire in the night, and we must keep a watch for them. Call Wallace when your time's up. Now, fellows, roll in." When the pink of dawn was shading white, we were at our posts. A long, hot day, interminably long, deadening to the keenest interest, passed, and still no Mustangs came. We slept and watched again in the grateful cool of night, till the 3rd day broke. The hours passed, the cool breeze changed to hot, the sun blazed over the canyon wall, the stones scorched, the flies buzzed. I fell asleep in the scant shade of the sage bushes, and awoke stifled and moist. The old plainsman, never weary, leaned with his back against a stone and watched, with narrow gaze, the canyon below. The steely walls hurt my eyes. The sky was like hot copper. Though nearly wild with heat and aching bones and muscles and the long hours of wait, I was ashamed to complain, for there sat the old man, still and silent. I routed out a hairy tarantula from under a stone and teased him into a frenzy with my stick, and tried to get up a fight between him and a scallop-backed horned-toad that blinked wonderingly at me. Then I espied a green lizard on a stone. The beautiful reptile was about a foot in length, bright green dotted with red, and he had diamonds for eyes. Near by a purple flower blossomed, delicate and pale, with a bee sucking at its golden heart. I observed then that the lizard had his jeweled eyes upon the bee. He slipped to the edge of the stone, flicked out a long red tongue, and tore the insect from its honeyed perch. Here were beauty, life, and death, and I had been weary for something to look at, to think about, to distract me from the wearisome weight. "Listen," broke in Jones's sharp voice. His neck was stretched, his eyes were closed, his ear was turned to the wind. With a thrilling, reawakened eagerness, I strained my hearing. I caught a faint sound, then lost it. "Put your ear to the ground," said Jones. I followed his advice and detected the rhythmic beat of galloping hoofs. "Mustangs are coming, sure as you're born," exclaimed Jones. "There, see that cloud of dust?" cried he a minute later. In the first bend of the canyon below, a splintered ruin of rock now lay under a rolling cloud of dust. A white flash appeared, a line of bobbing black objects, and more dust. Then, with a sharp pounding of hoofs, into clear vision shot a dense black band of mustangs, and well in front swung the White King. "Look, look! I never saw the beat of that, never in my born days," cried Jones. "How they move! Yet that white fellow isn't half stretched out. Get your picture before they pass. You'll never see the beat of that." With long manes and tails flying, the mustangs came on pace and passed us in a trampling roar, the white stallion in front. Suddenly a shrill whistling blast, unlike any sound I have ever heard, made the canyon fairly ring. The white stallion plunged back, and his band closed in behind him. He had seen our saddle horses. Then, trembling, whinnying, and with arched neck and high poised head bespeaking his mettle, he advanced a few paces, and again whistled his shrill note of defiance. Pure creamy white he was, and built like a racer. He pranced, struck his hoof hard, and cavorted. Then, taking sudden fright, he wheeled. It was then, when the mustangs were pivoting, with the white in the lead, that Jones jumped upon the stone, fired his pistol, and roared with all his strength. Taking his cue, I did likewise. The band huddled back again, uncertain and frightened, then broke up the canyon. Jones jumped the ditch with surprising agility, and I followed close at his heels. When we reached our plunging horses, he shouted, "Mount and hold this passage. Keep close by on that big stone at the turn so they can't run you down or stampede you. If they head your way, scare them back." Satan quivered, and when I mounted, reared and plunged. I had to hold him in hard, for he was eager to run. At the cliff wall, I was at some pains to check him. He kept champing his bit and stamping his feet. From my post, I could see the mustangs flying before a cloud of dust. Jones was turning in his horse behind a large rock in the middle of the canyon, where he evidently intended to hide. Presently, successive yells and shots from our comrades blended in a roar which the narrow box canyon augmented and echoed from wall to wall. High the white mustang reared, and above the roar whistled his snort of furious terror. His band wheeled with him and charged back, their hoofs ringing like hammers on iron. The crafty old buffalo hunter had hemmed the mustangs in a circle and had left himself free in the center. It was a wily trick, born of his quick mind and experienced eye. The stallion, closely crowded by his followers, moved swiftly. I saw that he must pass near the stone. Thundering, crashing, the horses came on. Away beyond them I saw Frank and Wallace. Then Jones yelled to me, "Open up! Open up!" I turned Satan into the middle of a narrow passage, screaming at the top of my voice and discharging my revolver rapidly. But the wild horses thundered on. Jones saw that they would not be balked, and he spurred his big bay directly in their path. The big horse, courageous as his intrepid master, dove forward. Then followed confusion for me. The pound of hoofs, the snorts, a screaming neigh that was frightful, the mad stampede of the mustangs with a whirling cloud of dust, bewildered and frightened me so that I lost sight of Jones. Danger threatened and passed me almost before I was aware of it. Out of the dust a mass of tossing manes, foam-flecked black horses, wild eyes and lifting hoof, rushed at me. Satan, with a presence of mind that shamed mine, leaped back and hugged the wall. My eyes were blinded by dust. The smell of dust choked me. I felt a strong rush of wind, and a Mustang grazed my stirrup. Then they had passed on the wings of the dust-laden breeze. But not all, for I saw that Jones had, in some inexplicable manner, cut the white Mustang and two of his blacks out of the band. He had turned them back again and was pursuing them. The bay he rode had never before appeared to much advantage, and now, with his long, lean, powerful body in splendid action, imbued with the relentless will of his rider, what a picture he presented! How he did run! With all that, the white Mustang made him look dingy and slow. Nevertheless, it was a critical time in the wild career of that king of horses. He had been pinned in a space 200 by 500 yards, half of which was separated from him by a wide ditch, a yawning chasm that he had refused. And behind him, always keeping on the inside, wheeled the yelling hunter, who savagely spurred his bay and whirled a deadly lasso. He had been cut off and surrounded. The very nature of the rocks and trails of the canyon threatened to end his freedom or his life. Certain it was he preferred to end the latter, for he risked death from the rocks as he went over them in long leaps. Jones could have roped either of the two blacks, but he hardly noticed them. Covered with dust and splotches of foam, they took their advantage, turned in a circle toward the passageway, and galloped by me out of sight. Again Wallace, Frank, and Jim let out strings of yells and volleys. The chase was narrowing down. Trapped, the white Mustang King had no chance. What a grand spirit he showed! Frenzied as I was with excitement, the thought occurred to me that this was an unfair battle, that I ought to stand aside and let him pass. But the blood and lust of primitive instinct held me fast. Jones, keeping back, met his every turn. Yet always, with the lithe and beautiful stride, the stallion kept out of reach of the whirling lariat. "Close in!" yelled Jones, with his voice, powerful with a note of triumph, bespoke the knell of the king's freedom. The trap closed in, back and forth at the upper end. The white Mustang worked. Then, rendered desperate by the closing in, he circled round nearer to me. Fire shone in his wild eyes. The wily Jones was not to be outwitted. He kept in the middle, always on the move, and he yelled to me to open up. I lost my voice again and fired my last shot. Then the Mustang burst into a dash of daring, despairing speed. It was his last magnificent effort. Straight for the wash at the upper end he pointed his racy, spirited head, and his white legs, stretched far apart, twinkled and stretched again. Jones galloped to cut him off, and the yells he emitted were demoniacal. It was a long, straight race for the Mustang, a short curve for the bay. That the white stallion gained was as sure as his resolve to elude capture, and he never swerved a foot from his course. Jones might have headed him, but manifestly he wanted to ride with him as well as to meet him. So, in case the lasso went true, a terrible shock might be averted. Up went Jones's arm as the space shortened and the lasso reined his head. Out it shot, lengthened like a yellow striking snake, and fell just short of the flying white tail. The white Mustang, fulfilling his purpose in his last heroic display of power, sailed into the air, up and over the wide wash like a white streak. Free! The dust rolled in a cloud from under his hoofs, and he vanished. Jones's superb horse, crashing down on his haunches, just escaped, sliding into the hole. I awoke to the realization that Satan had carried me in pursuit of the thrilling chase all the way across the circle without my knowing it. Jones calmly wiped sweat from his face, calmly coiled his lasso, and calmly remarked, "In trying to capture wild animals, a man must never be too sure. Now, what I thought my strong point was my weak point, the wash. I made sure no horse could ever jump that hole." End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of The Last Plainsman by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti. The Last Plainsman by Zane Grey, Chapter 7. Snake Gulch. Not far from the scene of our adventures with the White Streak, as we facetiously and appreciatively named the Mustang, a deep, flat cave indented the canyon wall. By reason of its sandy floor and close proximity to Frank's trickling spring, we decided to camp in it.
About dark, Lawson and Stewart straggled in on spent horses, and found awaiting them a bright fire, a hot supper, and cheery comrades. "Did you feller get to see him?" was the tall ranger's first question. "Did we get to see him?" echoed 5 lusty voices as one. "We did." It was after Frank, in his plain, blunt speech, had told of our experience, that the long Arizonan gazed fixedly at Jones. "Did ye actually tetch the hair on that mustang with a rope?" In all his days Jones never had a greater compliment. By way of reply he moved his big hand to a button of his coat, and fumbling over it, unwound a string of long white hairs, then said, "I pulled these out of his tail with my lasso. I missed his left hind foot about 6 inches." There were 6 of the hairs, pure, glistening white, and over 3 feet long. Stewart examined them in expressive silence, then passed them along, and when they reached me they stayed. The cave, lighted up by a blazing fire, appeared to me a forbidding, uncanny place. Small, peculiar round holes and dark cracks, suggestive of hidden vermin, gave me a creepy feeling, and although not oversensitive on the subject of crawling, creeping things, I voiced my disgust. "Say, I don't like the idea of sleeping in this hole. I'll bet it's full of spiders, snakes, and centipedes, and other poisonous things." Whatever there was in my inoffensive declaration to rouse the usually slumbering humor of the Arizonans and the thinly veiled ridicule of Colonel Jones, and a mixture of both in my once loyal California friend, I am not prepared to state. Maybe it was the dry, sweet, cool air of Nail Canyon. Maybe my suggestion awoke ticklish associations that worked themselves off thus. Maybe it was the first instance of my committing myself to a breach of camp etiquette. Be that what it may, my innocently expressed sentiment gave rise to bewildering dissertations on etymology, and most remarkable and startling tales from first-hand experience. "Like as not," began Frank in matter-of-fact tone, "them's tarantular holes, all right. And scorpions, centipedes, and rattlers always rustle with tarantulars. But we never mind them, not us fellers. We're used to sleepin' with 'em. Why, I often wake up in the night and see a big tarantula on my chest, and see him wink. Ain't that so, Jim?" "Sure as hell," drawled faithful, slow Jim. "Reminds me of how fatal the bite of a centipede is," took up Colonel Jones complacently. "Once I was sitting in camp with a hunter who suddenly hissed out, 'Jones, for God's sake, don't budge. There's a centipede on your arm.' He pulled his Colt and shot the blamed centipede off as clean as a whistle. But the bullet hit a steer in the leg, and would you believe it, the bullet carried so much poison that in less than 2 hours the steer died of blood poisoning. Centipedes are so poisoning they leave a blue trail on flesh just by crawling over it. Look there." He bared his arm, and there on the brown, corded flesh was a blue trail of something, that was certain. It might have been made by a centipede. "This is a likely place for them," put in Wallace, emitting a volume of smoke and gazing round the cave walls with the eyes of a connoisseur. "My archaeological pursuits have given me great experience with centipedes, as you may imagine, considering how many old tombs, caves, and cliff dwellings I've explored. This Algonquin rock is about the right stratum for centipedes to dig in. It digs somewhat after the manner of the fluid-filled, long-tailed decapcrustaceans of the genera Thermacoscata, the common crawfish, you know. From that, of course, you can imagine, if a centipede can bite rock, what a biter he is." I began to grow weak, and did not wonder to see Jim's long pipe fall from his lips. Frank looked queer around the gills, so to speak, but the gaunt Stewart never batted an eye. "I camped here 2 years ago," he said, "and the cave was alive with rock rats, mice, snakes, horned toads, lizards, and a big Gila monster, besides bugs, scorpion, rattlers, and as for tarantulas and centipedes, they couldn't sleep for the noise they made fightin'." "I seen the same," concluded Lawson, as nonchalant as a wild horse wrangler well could be. "And as for me, Now, I always lays perfectly still when the centipedes and tarantulas begin to drop down from their holes in the roof, same as them holes up there. And when they light on me, I never move, nor even breathe for about 5 minutes. Then they take a notion I'm dead and crawl off. But sure, if I'd breathed, I'd be a goner."
All of this was playfully intended for the extinction of an unoffending and impressionable tenderfoot. With an admiring glance at my tormentors, I rolled out my sleeping bag and crawled into it, vowing I would remain there even if devilfish armed with pikes invaded our cave. Late in the night I awoke. The bottom of the canyon and the outer floor of our cave lay bathed in white, clear moonlight. A dense, gloomy black shadow veiled the opposite canyon wall. High up the pinnacles and turrets pointed toward a resplendent moon. It was a weird, wonderful scene of beauty, entrancing, of breathless, dreaming silence that seemed not of life. Then a hoot owl lamented dismally, his call fitting the scene and the dead stillness. The echoes resounded from cliff to cliff, strangely mocking and hollow, at last reverberating low and mournful in the distance. How long I lay there enraptured with the beauty of light and mystery of shade, thrilling at the lonesome lament of the owl, I have no means to tell. But I was awakened from my trance by the touch of something crawling over me. Promptly I raised my head. The cave was as light as day. There, sitting sociably on my sleeping bag, was a great black tarantula, as large as my hand. For one still moment, notwithstanding my contempt for Lawson's advice, I certainly acted upon it to the letter. If ever I was quiet, and if ever I was cold, the time was then. My companions snored in blissful ignorance of my plight. Slight rustling sounds attracted my wary gaze from the old black sentinel on my knee. I saw other black spiders running to and fro on the silver sandy floor. A giant as large as a soft-shelled crab seemed to be meditating an assault upon Jones's ear. Another, grizzled and shiny with age or moonbeams, I cannot tell which, pushed long, tentative feelers into Wallace's cap. I saw black spots darting over the floor. It was not a dream. The cave was alive with tarantulas. Not improbably, my strong impression that the spider on my knee deliberately winked at me was the result of memory enlivening imagination, but it sufficed to bring to mind in one rapid, consoling flash the irrevocable law of destiny, that the deeds of the wicked return unto them again. I slipped back into my sleeping bag with a keen consciousness of its nature, and carefully pulled the flap in place, which almost hermetically sealed me up. "Hey, Jones, Wallace, Frank, Jim!" I yelled from the depths of my safe refuge. Wondering cries gave me glad assurance that they had awakened from their dreams. "The cave's alive with tarantulas!" I cried, trying to hide my unholy glee. "I'll be derned if it ain't!" ejaculated Frank. "Sure it beats hell," added Jim, with a shake of his blanket. "Look out, Jones, there's one on your pillow!" shouted Wallace. Whack! Sharp blow proclaimed the opening of hostilities. Memory stamped indelibly every word of the incident, but innate delicacy prevents the repetition of all, save the old warrior's concluding remarks. "Place I was ever in. Tarantulas by the million. Centipedes, scorpions, bats, rattlesnakes, too. I'll swear. Look out, Wallace. There, under your blanket."
From the shuffling sounds which wafted sweetly into my bed, I gathered that my long friend from California must have gone through motions credible to a contortionist. An ensuing explosion from Jones proclaimed to the listening world that Wallace had thrown a tarantula upon him. Further fearful language suggested the thought that Colonel Jones had passed on the inquisitive spider to Frank. The reception accorded the unfortunate tarantula, no doubt scared out of his wits, began with a wild yell from Frank and ended up in pandemonium. While the confusion kept up, with whacks and blows and threshing about, with language such as never before had disgraced a group of old campers, I choked with rapture and reveled in the sweetness of revenge. When quiet regained once more in the black and white canyon, only one sleeper lay on the moon-silvered sand of the cave. At dawn, when I opened my sleepy eyes, Frank, Jim, Stewart, and Lawson had departed as prearranged with the outfit,
leaving the horses belonging to us and rations for the day. Wallace and I wanted to climb the divide at the break and go home by way of Snake Gulch, and the colonel acquiesced, with the remark that his 63 years had taught him there was much to see in the world. Coming to undertake it, we found the climb, except for a slide of weathered rock, no great task, and we accomplished it in half an hour, with breath to spare and no mishap to horses. But descending into Snake Gulch, which was only a mile across the sparsely cedared ridge, proved to be tedious labor. By virtue of Satan's patience and skill, I forged ahead, which advantage, however, meant more risk for me because of the stones set in motion above. They rolled and bumped and cut into me, and I sustained many a bruise trying to protect the sinewy, slender legs of my horse. The descent ended without serious mishap. Snake Gulch had a character and sublimity which cast Nail Canyon into the obscurity of forgetfulness. The great contrast lay in the diversity of structure. The rock was bright red with parapet of yellow that leaned, heaved, and bulged outward. The emblazoned cliff walls, 2,000 feet high, were cracked from turret to base. They bowled out at such an angle that we were afraid to ride under them. Mountains of yellow rock hung balanced, ready to tumble down at the first angry breath of the gods. We rode among carved stones, pillars, obelisks, and sculptured ruined walls of a fallen Babylon. Slides reaching all the way across and far up the canyon walls obstructed our passage. On every stone silent green lizards sunned themselves, gliding swiftly as we came near to their marble homes. We came into a region of wind-blown caves, of all sizes and shapes, high and low on the cliffs. But strange to say, only on the north side of the canyon they appeared with dark mouths open and uninviting. One, vast and deep, though far off, menaced us as might the cave of a tawny-maned king of beasts. Yet it impelled, fascinated, and drew us on. "It's a long, hard climb," said Wallace to the colonel as we dismounted. "Boys, I'm with you," came the reply, and he was with us all the way as we clambered over the immense blocks, then threaded a passage between them and pulled weary legs up, one after the other. So steep lay the jumble of cliff fragments that we lost sight of the cave long before we got near it. Suddenly we rounded a stone to a halt and gasped at the thing looming before us. The dark portal of death or hell might have yawned there. A gloomy hole, large enough to admit a church, had been hollowed in the cliff by ages of nature's chiseling. "Vast sepulchre of times past, give up thy dead," cried Wallace solemnly. "Oh, dark Stygian cave forlorn," quoted I, as feeling as my friend. Jones hauled us down from the clouds. "Now I wonder what kind of prehistoric animal holed in here," said he, forever the one absorbing interest. If he realized the sublimity of this place, he did not show it. The floor of the cave ascended from the very threshold. Stony ridges circled from wall to wall. We climbed till we were 200 feet from the opening, yet we were not half-way to the dome. Our horses, browsing in the sage far below, looked like ants. So steep did the ascent become that we desisted, for if one of us had slipped on the smooth incline, the result would have been terrible. Our voices rang clear and hollow from the walls. We were so high that the sky was blotted out by the overhanging square, cornice-like top of the door, and the light was weird, dim, shadowy, opaque. It was a gray tomb. "Wahoo!" yelled Jones with all the power of his wide, leathery lungs. Thousands of devilish voices rushed at us, seemingly on puffs of winds, mocking. Deep echoes bellowed from the ebon shades at the back of the cave, and the walls, taking them up, hurled them on again in fiendish concatenation. We did not again break the silence of that tomb, where the spirits of ages lay in dusty shrouds, and we crawled down as if we had invaded a sanctuary and invoked the wrath of the gods. We all proposed names, Montezuma's Amphitheater being the only rival of Jones's selection, Echo Cave, which we finally chose. Mounting our horses again, we made 20 miles of Snake Gulch by noon, when we rested for lunch.
All the way up we had played the boys' game of spying for sights, with the honors about even. It was a question if Snake Gulch ever before had such a raking over. Despite its name, however, we discovered no snakes. From the sandy niche of a cliff where we lunched, Wallace espied a tomb, and heralded his discovery with a victorious whoop. Digging in old ruins roused in him much the same spirit that digging in old books roused in me. Before we reached him, he had a big bowie knife buried deep in the red sandy floor of the tomb. This one-time sealed house of the dead had been constructed of small stones, held together by a cement the nature of which, Wallace explained, had never become clear to civilization. It was red in color and hard as flint, harder than the rocks it glued together. The tomb was half round in shape, and its floor was a projecting shelf of cliff rock. Wallace unearthed bits of pottery, bone, and finely braided rope, all of which, to our great disappointment, crumbled to dust in our fingers. In the case of the rope, Wallace assured us this was a sign of remarkable antiquity. In the next mile we traversed, we found dozens of these old cells, all demolished except for a few feet of the walls, all despoiled of their one-time possessions. Wallace thought these depredations were due to Indians of our own time. Suddenly we came upon Jones, standing under a cliff, with his neck craned to a desperate angle.
"Now, what's that?"
demanded he, pointing upward. High on the cliff wall appeared a small, round protuberance. It was of the unmistakably red color of the other tombs, and Wallace, more excited than he had been in the cougar chase, said it was a sepulchre, and he believed it had never been opened. From an elevated point of rock as high up as I could well climb, I decided both questions with my glass. The tomb resembled nothing so much as a mud wasp's nest, high on a barn wall. The fact that it had never been broken open quite carried Wallace away with enthusiasm. "This is no mean discovery, let me tell you that," he declared. "I am familiar with the Aztec, Toltec, and Pueblo ruins, and here I find no similarity. Besides, we are out of their latitude. An ancient race of people, very ancient indeed, lived in this canyon. How long ago, it is impossible to tell."
"They must have been birds," said the practical Jones. "Now, how'd that tomb get there? Look at it, will you?"
As near as we could ascertain, it was 300 feet from the ground below, 500 from the rim wall above, and could not possibly have been approached from the top. Moreover, the cliff wall was as smooth as a wall of human make. "There's another one," called out Jones. "Yes, and I see another. No doubt there are many of them," replied Wallace. "In my mind, only one thing possible accounts for their position. You observe they appear to be about level with each other. Well, once the canyon floor ran along that line, and in the ages gone by it is lowered, washed away by the rains." This conception staggered us, but it was the only one conceivable. No doubt we all thought at the same time of the little rainfall in that arid section of Arizona.
"How many years?"
queried Jones. "Years? What are years?" said Wallace. "Thousands of years, ages have passed since the race who built these tombs lived." Some persuasion was necessary to drag our scientific friend from the spot, where, obviously helpless to do anything else, he stood and gazed longingly at the isolated tombs. The canyon widened as we proceeded, and hundreds of points that invited inspection, such as overhanging shelves of rock, dark fissures, caverns, and ruins, had to be passed by for lack of time. Still more interesting and important discovery was to come, and the pleasure and honor of it fell to me. My eyes were sharp and peculiarly far-sighted. The Indian sight, Jones assured me, and I kept them searching the walls in such places as my companions overlooked. Presently, under a large bulging bluff, I saw a dark spot which took the shape of a figure. This figure, I recollected, had been presented to my sight more than once, and now it stopped me. The hard climb up the slippery stones was fatiguing, but I did not hesitate, for I was determined to know. Once upon the ledge, I let out a yell that quickly set my companions in my direction. The figure I had seen was a dark red devil, a painted image, rude, unspeakably wild, crudely executed, but painted by the hand of man. The whole surface of the cliff wall bore figures, of all shapes, men, animals, birds, and strange devices, some in red paint, mostly in yellow. Some showed the wear of time, others were clear and sharp. Wallace puffed up to me, but he had wind enough left for another whoop. Jones puffed up also, and seeing the first thing a rude sketch of what might have been a deer or buffalo, he commented thus: "Darn me if I ever saw an animal like that. Boys, this is a find, sure as you're born, because not even the Piutes ever spoke of these figures."
I doubt if they know they're here. And the cowboys and wranglers, what few ever get here in 100 years, never saw these things. Beats anything I ever saw in the Mackenzie or anywhere else.
The meaning of some devices was as mystical as that of others was clear. Two blood-red figures of men, the larger dragging the smaller by the hair, while he waved aloft a blood-red hatchet or club, left little to conjecture. Here was the old battle of men, as old as life. Another group, two figures of which resembled the foregoing in form and action, battling over a prostrate form, rudely feminine in outline, attested to an age when men were as susceptible as they are in modern times, but more forceful and original. An odd yellow Indian waved aloft a red hand, which striking picture suggested the idea that he was an ancient Macbeth, listening to the knocking at the gate. There was a character representing a great chief, before whom many figures lay prostrate, evidently slain or subjugated. Large red paintings in the shape of bats occupied prominent positions, and must have represented gods or devils. Armies of marching men told of that blight of nations, old or young, war. These and birds unnameable and beasts unclassifiable, with dots and marks and hieroglyphics, recorded the history of a bygone people. Symbols they were of an era that had gone into the dim past, leaving only these marks, forever unintelligible, yet while they stood, century after century, ineffaceable reminders of the glory, the mystery, the sadness of life.
"How could paint of any kind last so long?" asked Jones, shaking his head doubtfully.
"That is the unsolvable mystery," returned Wallace. "But the records are there. I am absolutely sure the paintings are at least 1,000 years old. I have never seen any tombs or paintings similar to them. Snake Gulch is a find, and I shall some day study its wonders." Sundown caught us within sight of Oakspring, and we soon trotted into camp to the welcoming chorus of the hounds. Frank and the others had reached the cabin some hours before. Supper was steaming on the hot coals with a delicious fragrance. Then came the pleasantest time of the day. After a long chase or jaunt, the silent moments, watching the glowing embers of the fire, the speaking moments when a red-blooded story rang clear and true, the twilight moments, when the wood smoke smelled sweet. Jones seemed unusually thoughtful. I had learned that this preoccupation in him meant the stirring of old associations, and I waited silently. By and by, Lawson snored mildly in a corner. Jim and Frank crawled into their blankets, and all was still. Wallace smoked his Indian pipe and hunted in firelight dreams.
"Boys,"
said our leader finally,
"somehow the echoes dying away in that cave reminded me of the mourn of the big white wolves in the barren lands."
Wallace puffed huge clouds of white smoke, and I waited, knowing that I was to hear at last the story of the colonel's great adventure in the Northland. End of chapter 7. Of The Last of the Plainsmen by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mike Vendetti, mikevendetti.com. The Last of the Plainsmen by Zane Grey. Chapter 8. Naza, Naza, Naza. It was a waiting day at Fort Chipewyan. The lonesome, far northern Hudson Bay trading post seldom saw such life. Teepees dotted the banks of the Slave River, and lines of blanketed Indians paraded its shores. Near the boat landing, a group of chiefs, grotesque in semi-barbaric, semi-civilized splendor, but black-browed, austere-eyed, stood in savage dignity with folded arms and high-held heads. Lounging on the grassy bank were white men, traders, trappers, and officials of the post. All eyes were on the distant curve of the river, where, as it lost itself in a fine fringed bend of dark green, white glinting waves danced and fluttered. A June sky lay blue in the majestic stream. Ragged, spear-topped, dense green trees massed down to the water. Beyond rose bold, bald-knobbed hills in remote purple relief. A long Indian arm stretched south. The waiting eyes discerned a black speck on the green and watched it grow. A flatboat, with a man standing to the oars, bore down swiftly. Not a red hand nor a white one offered to help the voyager in the difficult landing. The oblong, clumsy, heavily laden boat surged in with the current and passed the dock despite the boatman's efforts. He swung his craft in below upon a bar and roped it fast to a tree. The Indians crowded above him on the bank. The boatman raised his powerful form erect, lifted a bronze face, which seemed set in craggy hardness, and cast from narrow eyes a keen, cool glance on those above. The silvery gleam in his hair told of years. Silence, impressive as it was ominous, broke only to the rattle of camping paraphernalia, which the voyager threw to a level grassy bench on the bank. Evidently this unwelcome visitor had journeyed from afar, and his boat, sunk deep into the water with its load of barrels, boxes, and bags, indicated that the journey had only begun. Significant, too, were a couple of long Winchester rifles shining on a tarpaulin. The cold-faced crowd stirred and parted to permit the passage of a tall, thin, gray personage of official bearing in a faded military coat. "Are you the musk ox hunter?" he asked in tones that contained no welcome. The boatman greeted this peremptory interlocutor with a cool laugh, a strange laugh, in which the muscles of his face appeared not to play. "Yes, I am that man," he said. "The chiefs of the Chippewayan and Great Slave tribes have been apprised of your coming. They have held council and are here to speak with you." At a motion from the commandant, the line of chieftains piled down to the level bench and formed a half circle before the voyager. To a man who had stood before grim Sitting Bull and noble Black Thunder of the Sioux, and faced the falcon-eyed Geronimo, and glanced over the sights of a rifle at gorgeous, feathered, wild, free Comanches, this semicircle of savages, lords of the North, was a sorry comparison. Bedaubled and betrinketed, slouchy and slovenly, these low-statured chiefs belied in appearance their scorn-bright eyes and lofty mien. They made a sad group. One who spoke in unintelligible language rolled out a haughty, sonorous voice over the listening multitude. When he had finished, a half-breed interpreter, in the dress of a white man, spoke at a signal from the commandant. He says, "Listen to the great orator of the Chippewayan. He has summoned all the chiefs of the tribes south of Great Slave Lake. He has held council. The cunning of the paleface, who comes to take the musk oxen, is well known. Let the paleface hunter return to his own hunting grounds. Let him turn his face from the north. Never will the chiefs permit the white man to take musk oxen alive from their country. The agatir, the musk ox, is their god. He gives them food and fur. He will never come back if he is taken away, and the reindeer will follow him. The chiefs and their people would starve. They command the paleface hunter to go back. They cry, 'Naza, Naza, Naza.'" "Say, for 1,000 miles I've heard that word, Naza," returned the hunter, with mingled curiosity and disgust. "At Edmonton, Indian runners started ahead of me, and every village I struck, the redskins would crowd around me, and an old chief would harangue at me, and motion me back, and point north with 'Naza, Naza, Naza.' What does it mean?" "No white man knows. No Indian will tell," answered the interpreter. "The traders think it means the Great Slave, the North Star, the North Spirit, the North Wind, the North Lights, and Agatir, the musk ox god." "Well, say to the chiefs to tell Agatir I have been 4 moons on the way after some of his little Agatirs, and I'm going to keep on after them." "Hunter, you are most unwise," broke in the commandant in his officious voice. "The Indians will never permit you to take a musk ox alive from the north. They worship him, pray to him. It is a wonder you have not been stopped." "Who will stop me?" "The Indians. They will kill you if you do not turn back." "Faugh! To tell an American plainsman that!" The hunter paused a steady moment, with his eyelids narrowing over slits of blue fire. "There is no law to keep me out. Nothing but Indian superstition and the greed of the Hudson's Bay people. And I am an old fox.
not to be fooled by petty baits. For years the officers of this fur trading company have tried to keep out explorers. Even Sir John Franklin, an Englishman, could not buy food of them. The policy of the company is to side with the Indians, to keep out traders and trappers. Why? So they can keep on cheating the poor savages out of clothing and food by trading a few trinkets and blankets, a little tobacco and rum for millions of dollars' worth of furs. Have I failed to hire man after man, Indian after Indian, not to know why I cannot get a helper? Have I, a plainsman, come 1,000 miles alone to be scared by you or a lot of craven Indians? Have I been dreaming of musk oxen for 40 years to slink south now, when I begin to feel the north? Not I. Deliberately every chief, with the sound of a hissing snake, spat in the hunter's face. He stood immovable while they perpetrated the outrage, then calmly wiped his cheeks, and in his strange, cool voice addressed the interpreter. Tell them thus they show their true qualities, to insult in council. Tell them they are not chiefs, but dogs. Tell them they are not even squaws, only poor, miserable, starved dogs. Tell them I turn my back on them. Tell them the paleface has fought real chiefs, fierce, bold, like eagles, and he turns his back on dogs. Tell them he is the one who could teach them to raise the musk ox and the reindeer, and to keep out the cold and the wolf. But they're blinded. Tell them the hunter goes north. Through the council of chiefs ran a low mutter, as of gathering thunder. True to his word, the hunter turned his back on them. As he brushed by, his eye caught a gaunt savage slipping from the boat. At the hunter's stern call, the Indian leaped ashore and started to run. He had stolen a parcel, and would have succeeded in eluding its owner, but for an unforeseen obstacle, as striking as it was unexpected. A white man of colossal stature had stepped in the chief's passage and laid two great hands on him. Instantly the parcel flew from the Indian, and he spun in the air to fall into the river with a sounding splash. Yells signaled the surprise and alarm caused by this unexpected incident. The Indian frantically swam to the shore, whereupon the champion of the stranger in a strange land lifted a bag, which gave forth a musical clink of steel, and throwing it with the camp articles on the grassy bench, he extended a huge, friendly hand. "My name is Rea," he said in a deep, cavernous tones. "Mine is Jones," replied the hunter, and right quickly did he grasp the proffered hand. He saw in Rea a giant of whom he was but a stunted shadow. 6½ feet Rea stood, with yard-wide shoulders, a bulk of bone and brawn. His ponderous, shaggy head rested on a bull neck. His broad face, with its low forehead, its close-shut mastiff under jaw, its big opaque eyes, pale and cruel as those of a jaguar, marked him a man of terrible brute force. "Free trader," called the commandant. "Better think twice before you join fortunes with the musk ox hunter." "To hell with you and your rantin', dog-eared redskins," cried Rea. "I've run agin a man of my own kind, a man of my own country, and I'm going with him." With this he thrust aside some encroaching, gaping Indians, so unconcernedly and ungently that they sprawled upon the grass. Slowly the crowd mounted and once more lined the bank. Jones realized that by some late turning stroke of fortune he had fallen in with one of the few free traders of the province. These free traders, from the very nature of their calling, which was to defy the fur company and to trap and trade on their own account, were a hardy and intrepid class of men. Rea's worth to Jones exceeded that of a dozen ordinary men. He knew the ways of the North, the language of the tribes, the habits of the animals, the handling of dogs, and uses of food and fuel. Moreover, it soon appeared that he was a carpenter and blacksmith. "There's my kit," he said, dumping the contents of his bag. It consisted of a bunch of steel traps, some tools, a broken axe, a box of miscellaneous things such as trappers use, and a few articles of flannel. "Thievin' redskins," he added in explanation of his poverty. "Not much of an outfit, but I'm the man for you. Besides, I had a pal once who knew you on the plains, called you Buff Jones. Old Jim Brent he was."
"I recollect Jim," said Jones. "He went down in Custer's last charge. So you were Jim's pal." "That'd be a recommendation, if you needed one. But the way you chucked that Indian overboard got me." Ray soon manifested himself as a man of few words and much action. With the planks Jones had on board, he heightened the stern and bow of the boat to keep out the beating waves in the rapids. He fashioned a steering gear and a less awkward set of oars, and shifted the cargo so as to make more room in the craft. "Buff, we're in for a storm. Set up a tarpaulin and make a fire. We'll pretend to camp to-night. Those Indians won't dream we'd try to run the river after dark, and we'll slip by under cover." The sun glazed over, clouds moved up from the north, a cold wind swept the tips of the spruces, and rain commenced to drive in gusts. By the time it was dark, not an Indian showed himself. They were housed from the storm. Lights twinkled in the teepees and the big log cabins of the trading company. Jones scouted round till pitchy black night. Then a freezing, pouring blast sent him back to the protection of the tarpaulin. When he got there, he found that Ray had taken it down and awaited him. "Off," said the free trader, and with no more noise than a drifting feather the boat sprung into the current and glided down, till the twinkling fires no longer accentuated the darkness. By night the river, in common with all swift rivers, had a sullen voice, and murmured its hurry, its restraint, its menace, its meaning. The two boatmen, one at the steering gear, one at the oars, faced the pelting rain and watched the dim, dark line of trees. The craft slid noiselessly onward into the gloom, and into Jones's ears above the storm poured another sound, a steady, muffled rumble, like the roll of giant chariot wheels. It had come to be a familiar roar to him, and the only thing which in his long life of hazard had ever sent the cold, prickling, tight shudder over his warm skin. Many times on the Athabasca that rumble had presaged the dangerous and dreaded rapids. "Hell Bend Rapids," shouted Ray. "Bad water, but no rocks." The rumble expanded to a roar, the roar to a boom that charged the air with heaviness, with a dreamy burr. The whole indistinct world appeared to be moving to the lash of wind, to the sound of rain, to the roar of the river. The boat shot down and sailed aloft, met shock on shock, breasted leaping dim white waves, and in a hollow, unearthly blend of watery sounds rode on, buffeted, tossed, pitched into a black chaos, and yet gleamed with obscure shrouds of light. Then the convulsive stream shrieked out a last defiance, changed its course abruptly to slow down, and drown the sound of rapids in muffling distance. Once more the craft swept on smoothly to the drive of the wind and rush of the rain. By midnight the storm cleared. Murky clouds split to show shiny blue-white stars, and a fitful moon that silvered the crests of the spruces and sometimes hid like a gleaming black-threaded pearl behind the dark branches. Jones, a plainsman, all his days wonderingly watched the moon-blanched water. He saw it shade and darken under shadowy walls of granite, where it swelled with hollow song and gurgle. He heard again the far-off rumble, faint on the night wind. High cliff banks appeared, walled out the mellow light, and the river suddenly narrowed. Yawning holes, whirlpools of a second, opened with a gurgling suck and raced with the boat. On the craft flew. Far ahead, a long, declining plain of jumping, frosted waves played dark and white with the moonbeams. The slave plunged to his freedom down his river, stone-spiked bed, knowing no patient eddy, and white-wreathed his dark, shiny rocks in spume and spray. End of chapter 8.